2 American service members are dead tonight. A third is missing. And the ceasefire that was supposed to hold the line between the United States and Iran hasn't just cracked, it has completely collapsed, dragging the entire Gulf region into what is now an open multi-front war. Here's exactly what happened. On the night of July 17th, Iranian ballistic missiles and drones struck U.S. military positions in Jordan. 2 American service members were killed in action while defending their base against that attack. A third remains unaccounted for as of this recording. 4 additional service members were hurt badly enough to require medical evacuation to hospitals in Jordan, though they've since been treated and discharged. Other personnel sustained minor injuries and have already returned to duty. U.S. Central Command has not released the names of the 2 fallen soldiers. That's standard military protocol. Families are notified privately first, and only after that, 24 hours later, do the names become public. So somewhere in America right now, 2 families are living through the worst night of their lives, and the rest of the country doesn't even know their names yet. These are the first American combat deaths from Iranian fire since March, and March was already brutal. 6 U.S. Army Reserve soldiers were killed when Iran struck a makeshift operations center at Kuwait's Shuaibah port. Days after that, an Army sergeant died from injuries sustained in a separate attack inside Saudi Arabia. And in a grim coincidence that added to the toll without being tied to enemy fire, 6 more service members died on March 12th, when a U.S. Air Force refueling aircraft, a KC-135 Stratotanker, crashed in western Iraq. The military was clear that crash was not the result of hostile or friendly fire, but for a public already grieving combat losses, it landed as one more name added to a growing list. Even a U.S. Navy search for a missing service member whose helicopter went down in the Arabian Sea back in early July was called off, again with officials stating there was no indication of hostile action. All of that was supposed to be the worst of it. Instead, it was a preview. Within hours of the Jordan attack becoming public, President Trump ordered a direct military response. U.S. Central Command launched retaliatory strikes at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday. The bombing campaign ran for more than 5 hours, wrapping up around 11:30 p.m. Central Command said the targets included Iranian coastal surveillance sites, air defense facilities, naval capabilities, and depots storing missiles and drones. The stated objective was twofold: punish the specific Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps forces responsible for launching the attack that killed the 2 Americans, and degrade Iran's broader capacity to keep threatening commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. This wasn't a one-off. It was, by Central Command's own count, the 8th consecutive night of American military operations against Iran. 8 nights in a row of strikes since the fragile ceasefire that had briefly held earlier this month broke down entirely, specifically over the question of who controls the Strait of Hormuz. To understand why that single stretch of water matters so much, you have to understand what flows through it. Before this war escalated, the strait carried something in the range of 1/5 of the entire world's crude oil supply. Every day, tankers moved through that narrow channel between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula, feeding refineries and economies across the globe. Right now, that traffic has slowed to a trickle. Shipping companies are rerouting where they can and simply not sailing where they can't. The economic pressure of that alone, quite apart from the human cost of the war, is starting to ripple through global energy markets. And Iran has made clear the strait isn't the only front. Iranian drones have targeted vessels near Oman's coastline, striking just days after Iran and Oman had been in active negotiations over a joint framework for managing traffic through the waterway. Iran's Revolutionary Guard has also struck ships operating close to Omani territorial waters. Tehran has signaled, through a semi-official state outlet, that if its own infrastructure keeps getting hit by American strikes, it's prepared to expand its target list to include ports in 5 different Gulf states: Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, and the UAE. Every one of them a country that hosts U.S. military facilities. That threat stopped being theoretical almost immediately. On Sunday, Kuwait's military confirmed its air defense systems were actively intercepting what it called hostile missile and drone attacks, describing the incoming fire as sinful Iranian aggression. At the same time, air raid sirens sounded across Bahrain, including in the capital city of Manama. Bahrain's Interior Ministry issued a public statement urging citizens and residents to remain calm and move to the nearest safe location. This is no longer a bilateral exchange between Washington and Tehran. It is a regional war involving nearly every U.S.-aligned government in the Gulf. The rhetoric from both sides' leadership has hardened accordingly. President Trump called the deaths of the 2 American soldiers a very sad thing, and reaffirmed that the United States will never allow Iran to obtain a nuclear weapon. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was more combative, saying the loss of American troops only stiffens our resolve, a signal that Washington has no intention of pulling back, regardless of the casualty count. On the Iranian side, the man now issuing the warnings is Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei, who took over Iran's leadership after his father was killed earlier this year in a joint U.S.-Israeli strike on Tehran in late February. Mojtaba Khamenei has largely stayed out of public view since assuming the role, but this weekend he broke that silence with a written statement warning that the United States would face what he called unforgettable lessons at the hands of Tehran and its regional allies. He extended that warning beyond Iran's own forces, invoking what he called the axis of resistance, the broader network of allied militias and proxy forces across the region, a signal that Iran may be preparing to activate groups beyond its own military to widen the pressure on U.S. positions. Analysts tracking the conflict describe what's happening as an escalation ladder with no visible ceiling. Every American strike prompts an Iranian response. Every Iranian response prompts an American strike. Each side is trying to reset what the other considers an acceptable cost of continued aggression, and each reset pushes the overall violence one level higher than the last. One Israeli analyst following the exchanges put it simply: every U.S. escalation gets met by an Iranian escalation, as both sides try to establish new deterrence thresholds with each round. Iranian state media, for its part, claims that recent U.S. strikes have moved beyond purely military targets and are increasingly hitting basic infrastructure: tunnels, roads, bridges, and rail lines inside Iran. If accurate, that shift raises serious concern about how much further this conflict could spread, and how much harder it becomes to walk back once civilian infrastructure becomes part of the exchange. A war fought purely between militaries is difficult enough to end. A war that starts degrading the roads and rail networks ordinary Iranians depend on becomes something much harder to de-escalate, because the damage stops being reversible with a diplomatic handshake. Right now, there's no ceasefire on the table. There's no summit scheduled. There's no sign that either side is preparing to step back. What there is: 2 dead American service members whose names the public doesn't yet know, a missing soldier whose fate is still unresolved, air raid sirens going off in Gulf capitals hundreds of miles from where this started, and a president who has just ordered an 8th night of strikes to be followed, almost certainly, by a 9th. The Strait of Hormuz sits at the center of all of it, a stretch of water no more than about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, controlling access for 1/5 of the planet's oil. Whoever ends up in control of that choke point, or whoever succeeds in shutting it down entirely, will have shaped not just the outcome of this specific war, but the shockwaves it sends through a global economy already straining under its absence. For now, the fighting continues. The names of the fallen will become public in the coming hours, and the question hanging over Washington, Tehran, and every capital in the Gulf is not whether this conflict will escalate further. It already has, 8 nights running, but how much further it can go before someone somewhere decides the cost has become too high to keep paying